Part 2, Chapter 1, Concerning the Nature of God. The Sufis consider it an axiom that the world must have a creator. They affirm that he is one, ancient, first and last, the end and limit of all things, incomparable, unchangeable, indivisible, and immaterial, not subject to the laws of nature, time, place, or direction, but, in charge of such things, possessing the attributes of holiness and exempt from all opposite qualities. In this, their account agrees with the opinion of the Oriental thinking world in general, but they further assert that he is infinite and illimitable, by which they mean not only without beginning or end, but also without determinate position of time, place, or direction. The nature of God, according to them, is an infinite and illimitable light, a boundless and fathomless ocean, compared with which the entire universe is more insignificant than a drop of water in the sea. There is no single atom of existent beings which God does not pervade, compromise, and comprehend. God is always near to man, but man is always far from God because he is not aware of his proximity. The proximity of God to all created beings is the same, for the highest and the lowest are alike in his sight. The light of God is the only thing that can reveal this proximity to the traveler. There are 3 grades of proximity to God which are out of the reach of human intelligence: the proximity of time, place, and attributes. We can say, for instance, that Muhammad was nearer our own time than Christ, that the moon is nearer to the earth than the planet Jupiter, and that Bayezid Bistami's more closely resembled Muhammad in qualities than did any even of the prophet's contemporaries. Why? Will have to be explained, right? But we cannot predict this proximity of God. The verse of Al-Quran, he is with you wherever you are, Surah 57:8-4, alludes to this mysterious proximity. Intelligence has no road to the discovery of it, but when its majesty is overshadowed, the Illuminati, and they don't mean that 1700s organization that people talk like still exists and is like some, I mean, it's used for a lot of scams because, well, you won't buy a car, but this is not what we're talking about when we say the Illuminati. They perceived that in the sight of God, saints and prophets, unbelievers and heretics, the loftiest of mankind and the meanest of brutes, are alike compared with him. This is their explanation of the passage. Thou wilt see no distraction in the creation of the merciful one. No distinction in the creation of the merciful one. Al-Quran, Surah 67:8-3. And God's is the east and the west, and wherever you turn your faces, God is there. Surah 2:109. The traveler who has discovered this proximity possesses the one thing needful and has completed the journey to God. But until he shall have overcome the restraints of time and place, his steps can never border on the threshold of eternity. Eternity, in the sophistic sense, is the primal element of cosmos and takes in at one glance both past and future time. This idea is contained in the words of the Hadith. There is no morning or evening with thy Lord. The passage in Al-Quran. O assembly of Genie and men, if you are able to pass out of the confines of heaven, then pass out of them. But you will do so only by the authority which God gives you. Surah 55:8-33. Now remember, in Islam, heaven is not where you go when you die. There's hell realms, but there's paradise realms, but heaven is the sky. So the metanomial is not confused for the afterlife. What the metanomial uses to reference is not confused as afterlife, right? Which points to the majesty of him of whose proximity we are speaking. Solution of questions arising out of the Sufi account. The sophistic account of the nature and proximity of God gives rise to many questions amongst their disciples. For instance, in what way is the nature of God infinite and illimitable in a reference to the sensible and invisible world, separately considered? The answer, however, follows plainly from the previous statements. For since the nature of God is infinite and illimitable, and no notion of time, place, or direction attaches to it, it is equally above the highest conception of the invisible world and below the lowest material object of the sensible world. Again, their statement concerning the proximity of God to all things alike and as compromising and comprehending all things seems irreconcilable with any conception that human intelligence can form of his nature. The objection they meet by the following physical illustration. Earth is dense, water compared with earth is subtle. Air is more subtle than water, fire is more subtle than air, and the subtle occupies a higher position in the scale of creation than the dense. Now, although each of these four elements occupies a distinct position in nature, they are susceptible of commixture and are determined by the one and by the other. For if, for instance, a vessel be completely filled with earth, there will be space for water. And when it will contain no more water, it will still admit of the introduction of air. And when it will contain no more air, it will still admit of the introduction of fire. The comprehensive and penetrating capacities of each being in proportion to their relative densities. It will now be observed that there is no particle of the earth in the vessel, but is commingled with the water, and so on of the other three elements, each occupying its distinct and proper position according to its density. It is from the proper gradation and the arrangement of these four elements in the world that the phenomena of nature arise, but they are nevertheless susceptible of commixture and conjunction. This again may be proved by experiment. If one thrusts his hand into water, it is moistened and not burnt. If into fire, it is burnt and not moistened. But if he thrust it into boiling water, it is both moistened and burnt, thereby proving that these two elements are susceptible of commixture and conjunction. That the four elements do occupy their distinct and proper positions in nature is evident from the premises concerning their relative densities, for the denser cannot disturb or confine the more subtle. If all this be possible, then in the case of material elements, how much more possible is it in the case of the nature of God, which is immaterial and indivisible? Another closer illustration is that taken from the connection of the human soul with the body. The soul is conjoined with the body and does not merely reside in it, so that there is no atom of the corporeal frame distinct from or not pervaded, comprised and comprehended by it. The limbs may be separated one by one, and the body itself even cut into pieces without any wound or hurt accruing to the soul. For the body, which is the denser of the two, cannot disturb or confine the soul, which is the more subtle. And in like manner, the nature of God pervades, compromises, and comprehends everything, and is incapable of being disturbed or confined by anything. Again, since the nature of God is infinitely subtle, nothing can ever veil or conceal it, for the more subtle a thing is the greater its capacity for penetration. Thus the Sufis explain the expression of Al-Quran, he is subtle and the wise, reference to the nature of God. As for the truly subtle nature, they say that this sentence would convince everyone of the truth of the Muhammadan creed if they could but understand that this is the right interpretation of it. This proximity of God is implied in the verses. He is with you wherever you are. God seeth all you do. Al-Quran, Surah 57, Ayat 4. I am nearer to him than his jugular vein. Al-Quran, Surah 50, Ayat 15. And many similar passages, both of Al-Quran and the Hadith. The foregoing arguments are intended especially to confute the opinion that God is nearer to some men than others, namely, that the wise approach nearer to him than the ignorant. Their great object, however, is the inculcation of the beautiful truth, that he is ever near to those who seek him, whilst those only are far from him who by their actions fail to acknowledge that he is omnipresent and omniscient, knowing and seeing all they do. An eminent Sufi philosopher and poet, Bastami. Okay, yeah, that we know that. وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ Kabir from Surah 6, Ayat 103. In Sales version, the word al-Latif is rendered gracious. I have, however, translated it subtle, which is its primary meaning and accords with the Sufistic interpretations, or you could say uses, right? Chapter 2, concerning the attributes of God. Sheikh Sadr Uddin Rumi affirms that the attributes and names of God are convertible terms, but Sheikh Sa'ad Uddin Hamawi maintains that Al-Quran and Hadith contain no synonymous words whatever, and that it is incompatible with the character of a sage to make use of two or more expressions to convey a single meaning. Well, a single meaning, but there's other stuff with that, right? According to him, attributes are intrinsic and names descriptive. The former relating to the nature, the latter to the aspect of the being described. Works again relate to the individuality. This is the opinion generally received among the Sufis. Sheikh Sadr Uddin, on the other hand, maintains that the attributes of God are from one point themselves the nature of God and are contrary to it from another. They are also themselves the nature of God in this way, that when there is no existence save his nature, his attributes must of necessity be his nature too. They are contrary to it in this way, but as things understood are necessarily various, the names used to express them must be various too, and must imply distinctions of meaning and idea, but all distinction and divisibility is contrary to the nature of God. I don't know about all, but it's not conflicting. The names applied to God, the living, eternal, author or disposer, and omnipotent, imply his eternal and abiding nature. Actual names, according to the Muslim theory, theory is supposed to be the working facts, right? Having existed prior to their meanings. Such expressions, therefore, are the names of the actual names and are called positive attributes. These names are called the four pillars of divinity. Such names, however, as the exalter and the debaser, the giver of life and death, refer to attendant powers and are called relative attributes. Lastly, such names as the blameless, the holy one, the independent one, relate to the absence of imperfection and are hence called negative attributes. All the other names of God may be referred to one or the other of these three classes, except the name Allah itself, which compromises all the name, the attributes of his eternal and abiding name. For other names can be used to qualify it. The name merciful occurring in the initiatory formula in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, is held in the next greatest reverence, although referring to the outward attributes of God only. The Quran says, pray unto God. Allah is the singular and definitive for God, if I haven't mentioned that yet in this mini series here. Our pray unto the merciful one, Ar-Rahman, by whichsoever these two names you invoke him, it is equal for him, belong the best of names. Al-Quran, Surah 17, 810. All these names collectively or individually indicate one and the same God. One of the dogmas that people attribute to Islam that is not taught in the Quran or by the Prophet Muhammad is that the Quran, and by implication the Arabic language, is pre-existent to created things. Like they're a quality of God itself. But we're taught this is an Arabic Quran, as the Quran says. So therefore, the revelations to other prophets were also thus recited. So, and honestly, if you're going to say that things that happen with the speech of God are also uncreated, like what language or that sort of thing in any particular instance, not only are you going to have all the previous scriptures and all the previous languages that those scriptures came in that position, but you're going to have all of creation because God says the universe be and it is. God says to Jesus be and it is. So this doctrine that they picked up from some of the Jews creates a lot more problems than it. Chapter 3, concerning the works of God, physically considered. The works of God are of two kinds, visible and invisible. The first is perceived, the second is the conceived world. The perceived world is also called the material, visible, created, and lower world. The conceived world is spoken of as the invisible, spiritual, or future world. Well, conceived is not the same as that either. And the world of command. This division is based on the words, are not creation and command of him? Al-Quran, Surah 7, Ayat 52. The material world may be described in detail, but of the spiritual world we must be content with a mere outline, for none but those who have gone hence and entered into the spiritual life can know the condition thereof. As Jesus Christ has said, except a man be born again, he cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. There are two classes of beings in the invisible world whose existence is revealed in inspiration. Core, and those who make their existence felt beyond. Does core relate to the whole core myth? Because I think of a lot of these stories like, what do the names and stuff mean? That unravels a lot sometimes. But we're talking a different language, so the first are subdivided into two classes, namely emanations and agencies. Emanations are what are addressed in the words of Muhammad, salve in the majesty of God, in his glory, which was before the world began. They're called by the Muslim Mala'ik, Muhammad, angels, designated by the word Amu, salve, S-A-L-V-E, yeah. Muhammad gives the following account of him. Verily with the Most High God, there is a luminous land. The sun journeyeth there in 30 days, in an orbit of 30 days, like the days of the world. Its creation knows the Most High God, but there are others in the earth who know not God, the sons of Adam and Iblis. So think about that. As somebody worships the Father, who could that Father be? It's not God. God's not a father. God's not a mother. God's not a child. He's not a holy spook or ghost or however you're going to phrase that. Agencies are, as it were, the doorkeepers of divinity and the means by which God's bounty are vouchsafed to man. The head and chief of them, according to the Muslimin, is Muhammad, than whom there is no more exalted spirit. I have created nothing more honored in my sight than thee. The Holy Spirit or Gabriel is, according to them, the last of this class of agencies, being the actual and intermediate agent of the intercourse between God and man. There is not one of us who hath not his assigned position. The other beings whose existence is felt are also subdivided into two classes, namely the agents and powers. The former are the presiding Genie, are personified laws of animal, vegetable, and mineral production, whence the common saying, everything has its angel. Muhammad says, an angel descends in every drop of rain or dew, and the mystics assert that God does not create a single leaf upon a tree without the intervention of 7 angels. Well, the involvement, you could say intervention has implications. It's not theologically appropriate, but much less actually appropriate. The human soul, though compounded both of the material and the immaterial, is reckoned amongst this class. Well, the human soul, what we call the human, is a combination of both, right? It is the masterpiece of creation, and the whole material world is placed under its control. The powers who form the second class are the Genie and the devils. They are created of fire and constitute the lower order of beings in the invisible world. Some of them have a certain power over the race of man granted to them, but are rebellious against the Most High. Of these, Iblis is the head and chief. Others, again, although capable of harm, are subservient to the will of God. The material world is of two kinds, heavenly and earthly. The heavenly are the throne and the seat of God, or the highest heavens. These seven inferior heavens, the firmament and the stars. The earthly are the face of the earth, the elements, signs from on high, as thunder, lightning, and rain, compound bodies as minerals, vegetables, animals, the sea, other works of God without end. Such is the sophistic account of the works of God, physically considered. The command, al-amr, of God, kun fakan, being it was, is here alluded to. The Sufis in their poetry frequently speak of God as the Lord of Kaf and Noon, the two letters composing the word of the command kun, or be. Liyaj malakut asamawati wal arda man lam yulata Muratin. I'm not quite sure about how to read that one, but the Muslim, although frequently denying that Jesus is divine, recognize the inspiration. That's the what's called the Old Testament. The Old and New Testament is into, and it's not that they quote apocryphal gospels. They contain information that's contained in sources that aren't accepted. And there's an argument for the whole periklatos rather than paraklatos. But let's face it, there are over 10,000 variants in the Greek. And even if that one's not found, that sort of variety seems a little something like that possible, particularly when some of the changes have been established, how they happen. That would be just like that little switch of a letter here, the former being almost identical in significance with the name of Muhammad, Multam Laudatus. The charge of inconsistency in not believing our scriptures, they meet by accusing the Christians of having themselves altered many similar portions of the original, and you see that every generation in the Greek, there was changes, and usually variants from the gospel written in 90 to the gospel written in 150 to, for the most part, got bigger. But Yatemi Kahu na Kardaha Karana Darsut Kitaba Kanahu Chinda Melat Bashusta, the perfect one, ere the whole of Gabriel's book he reads, has blotted out the library of all the people's creeds. Now, I don't speak Farsi, so obviously the cha, Arabic doesn't have a cha, so that's, The table of Islamic cosmogony might assist. So from God, you have the primal elements, the first principles, the ha, ullah in Greek, and then you have the highest heaven, the arsh and the kursi, the seven heavens, the sevenfold sires, and the elements, the fourfold mothers. I'm not sure how they quite get that from one, but you're throwing Greek terms and stuff like this. So this somebody's chart somewhere. Based on some other secondary ideas, right? The stars in the firmament. Below that, the seven heavens. The lowest one is the one with the stars and the celestial bodies we would witness. And among that, down here in Earth, we have the mineral kingdom, animal kingdom, And chapter 4 of this is concerning the works of God metaphysically. The first thing that God created was the primal element. Jau Har Ra'ol. That is to say, the primal element of the entire universe. This, according to Al-Quran, he created of himself without any medium whatever, in an infinitely less space of time than the twinkling of an eye, and it was not the business of an hour, but even as the twinkling of an eye, or quicker still. Al-Quran, Surah 17, ayat 79. The primal element is designed by various other names, such as the primal intelligence, the constructive spirit, the pen, the mightiest spirit, the spirit of Muhammad, or the laudable spirit, and the like. The spirit of Muhammad, that's what they call shirk that's been inserted into. Muhammad never gave himself that distinction even above the other prophets, let alone that one. It is so excellent and subtle that God alone knows its worth. It is the perfection of wisdom and prop iniquity to God. Is ever yearning after him and ever present with him, nor is there anything save this primal element that can directly approach him or become the direct recipient of his bounty. The primal element is God's word, and the universe is the word of the primal element. By this alone, the voice of God is heard, but its voice is heard throughout the whole world, conveying the behests of the Most High. It is the pen of God, which at his command wrote down the simple natures, and in the twinkling of an eye they started into being, the intelligences, souls, elements, and natures, the heavens and the stars. These then took up the task and obeyed the second mandate by writing down the compound bodies, and straightway the mineral, vegetable, and kingdom, the animals, sprung into existence. Now, scientifically, humans are among what we call animals. So this is the explanation of the words which begin in the 68th chapter of Al-Quran, N by the pen, and what they write. The mystic letter represents the word of power, the inkstand of God, and the pen is the primal element, and what they write refers to the simple natures. These are the scribes of God, and the words they write are the compound bodies of nature. They are writing even now and will write on forever, for were the sea ink, it would not suffice for the words of my Lord. Quran, Surah 18, ayat 109. There's another verse that addresses the same thing. There are 9 heavenly spheres, each higher than the preceding. The highest of all is called the heaven of heavens, or the throne of God, Arsh. Each of these spheres possesses a soul and an intelligence higher, more subtle in proportion to their order. Intelligence of the heaven of heavens is called the primal intelligence. The souls and intelligences which occupy the other 8 are identical with the cherubim and spirits of the religious account. In point of time, they precede the simple natures of above referred to being eternal, while the latter are causal in point of mental excellence. However, they rank after them. Their precedence over the simple natures is as the precedence of the sun's orbit over its rays. The next in order of creation are the threefold offspring, the mineral, the vegetable, and the animal kingdoms. Both the metaphysical and the physical account agree concerning these last, that they are causal. But on their account of what are called the parents differs, because man was the final object of creation, and because when he has attained intelligence, he is complete, and because there is nothing beyond intelligence, and primal intelligence was also the beginning of all things, ergo intelligence is the beginning and end, and the circle is complete. This is proved as follows. The circle is traced by ascent and descent. Descent is the attribute of the simple nature, and ascent the attribute of compound bodies. Descent resides in parents, ascent and offspring, but both parents and offspring originated with the primal intelligence. Therefore, intelligence is both the beginning and the end. It refers alike to origin and return, to birth and dissolution. It refers to the night of power and of the day of resurrection. Again, descent, the remoter it is from the origin, the coarser it becomes, and ascent, the remoter it is from the origin, the more refined it becomes. Now, the primal intelligence caused the descent of the lower world and the ascent of the higher. Therefore, the former is much coarser than the latter, but they are still one and the same nature, but their nature originated from the nature of God. Therefore, the true conclusion is that the nature of God first was and first returned, but was still the same nature of God. From him was the origin, and him is the return. Surah 10, ayat 4. Some say that the originator of the intelligence of the lower world constitutes a 10th world and call it the intelligence of the lunar sphere, the active intelligence, or the bestower form. Most philosophers, however, agree that there are 10 intelligences of the higher world, all active, and originators of the intelligences and souls of the lower world. So it's the whole reason why they talk about, oh, the 10th sphere of the Kabbalah is, dot is theoretical. It's like, well, are they doing this because they're just trying to distinguish themselves from the Sufis who actually were known to express these things first, writing and otherwise? The difference in the intelligence of mankind is from this cause. Intelligences and souls constitute the higher world, and the fixed stars and planets are their administrators in the lower world through their influence. Therefore, the differences observable in mankind are in proportion to the differences existing between the various souls and intelligences of the higher world, and the differences existing between the fixed stars and the planets themselves. Now, the various qualities of the last are innumerable. Astrologers have discovered some of the properties of the 7 planets. Well, they've said stuff. Astrology is just saying stuff with stuff in the about stuff in the heavens. But no one can give any clue to those of the fixed stars. Many of the differences of the temperament observable among mankind are owing to the influence of the seasons, accident of birth, health, fortune, longevity, and alike again are all considered as due to the influence of the higher worlds. The method and means by which this influence is exerted is too mysterious and incomprehensible to be discussed. In Surah 62, ayat 7 of Al-Quran, we find these words: to God belong the treasures of the heaven and the earth. These are then of 2 kinds, heavenly and earthly. The first class belong the heavens and the earth and the stars, every one of which is a treasury. To the second class, these treasuries belong earth, air, fire, and water. Every plant and every animal, nay, every embryo, is a treasury in itself. Verily, there is nothing of which the treasury is not with us. Al-Quran 15:21. The treasuries of heaven and earth are countless. They may be called the host of the Lord, as Al-Quran has it. Verily to God belong the host of the heavens and the earth. So Al-Quran Surah 48, ayat 4. And we are mostly done with the book right now, it looks like. And Surah 16, ayat 79 has similarity to Psalm 29, verses 1 through 3. Well, it talks about the same sort of thing, right? Chapter 5 of the 4 universal sources. Daryaha, seas, something like that. The Sufis and Unitarians divide the universe into four sources, of which the first is the nature of God, the second the constructive spirit, and the third and fourth are the invisible and sensible worlds. This division is contrary to the doctrines contained in Al-Quran and the traditional law, although many of the strictest mullahs recognize it. These last say, however, the first source, that is God, created the other three out of nothing and will, when it pleases him, reduce them to nothing again. The Unitarians maintain that it is impossible for that which is not to be, and for that which is not to be, that which exists much ever exist, and that which exists not can never exist. How then acts the Sufis? Was the world made manifest? And the Unitarians reply as follows. The first source, which is God, is a hidden treasure, and he desired to be known. He therefore appeared, coming from internal to external being. This was the beginning of the second source, or constructive spirit. This again appeared. The third and fourth sources were in like manner made manifest. They are the invisible and sensible worlds. The manner in which these came into being, and from them all material objects, has been narrated in a previous chapter. Everything, therefore, proceeds from the first source. Well, that doesn't mean that everything else is also God. The source, then, which was the hidden treasure, was the internal nature of God, and every existent being a manifestation of his nature. Consequently, everything which exists is the nature of God, and there neither is nor can there be any other existence save his. It was to this doctrine that Abdullah ibn Abbas referred when he said, I shall be accused of unbelief if I interpret aright the verse, it is God who hath created the seven heavens, and of the earth like unto them, and his command descendeth between them, that ye may know that he hath power over all things. Al-Quran, Surah 65, Ayat 12. The Unitarians in general say that these four sources were always exactly as they are now and have no precedence whatever, the one over the other. For to assert that any one has such precedence would be to assume that it must either have been imperfect and grown to perfection, or have been originally perfect and subsequently deteriorated. But any notion of deterioration is incompatible with existence, since it must be the existence of God. Well, that makes it possible, but even on the presence doesn't make the universe, The initiated amongst them, however, allow that the first source has precedence over the second, and the second over the third and fourth, but they state that it is a precedence of order and mind, not a place or time. The precedence of the sun's orb over its rays are of cause over effect, each having been manifested by the preceding. The Unitarian theory must be summed up thus. God is the first source. He is the hidden treasure who desires to make himself known. The others are manifestations of the first, and the more manifestations take place, the more the first becomes known. The Sufis maintain that these four sources have a precedence, the one over the other, both of time and place, such precedence as Adam has over Muhammad. The origin of the universe is placed by them in eternity as all, not the same as Azal, different thing if you're thinking of something different. That of the constructive spirit, the second source from which it sprung, an eternity of eternities, as all, whilst the nature of God, the first source is eternal. Lam Yazul, Allah Yazul. The traveler then must overcome the restraints of time and space before his footsteps can border on the threshold of eternity. There are other Unitarians who explain the four sources as follows. The first source, the nature of God, they call an infinite and illimitable light, a boundless and fathomless sea. The second source, a constructive spirit proceeding from him, is likewise an infinite and illimitable light. and a boundless and fathomless sea. It comprises and comprehends every existent atom and governs and administers the entire universe. The remaining two sources are manifestations of this infinite light, and the recurring phenomena of nature are but continued manifestations of the same. The varied pictures I have drawn on space, behold, what fair and goodly sights they seem. One glimpse I gave them of my glorious face, and lo, 'tis now the universal theme. In this the Unitarian account differs little from the Sufistic, but the former say that the sole object of such manifestation was that God, the hidden treasure, might make himself known. It is, as it were, the mirror of God, the mirror in which his majesty and perfection was reflected, the mirror in which he sees himself. Look not askance, the Holy One will ever be the same. The God of all, though oft invoked by many a different name, the universe is the mirror of God, and the heart of man is the mirror of the universe. If the traveler would then know God, he must look into his own heart. If he would know the light, he must look into his own heart. In short, if he desired to avoid sin and ignorance and to attain to holiness and wisdom, the guide that shall conduct him on his path is there, a still small voice that ever bids him eschew the evil and choose the good. All the earth I'd wandered over, seeking till the beacon's light, never tarried in the daytime, never sought repose at night, till I heard a reverend preacher all the mystery declare. Then I looked within my bosom, and 'twas shining brightly there.